Hey guys, Dan Bradbury here, and welcome to this week's episode of the Dan Bradbury Podcast. And in this week's episode, I'm going to take you inside a dedicated skills session we do for our mastermind members. And this one was very, very interesting because ultimately, if you want to build a world-class company, you need a world-class team. But this isn't about the recruiting of those people, it's how do you get the very best out of the people that you've got. And this is a secret weapon that we've developed over time and seen it across some of our fastest growing clients. And that is, I don't like job descriptions. I like scorecards. I like job scorecards, employee scorecards. And in this skill session for our members, we dove deep into this. And we really spoke about how does it work and how do you assign the metrics and the scorecards so that you know what you're measuring, so that your employees buy into it, and ultimately to enhance their performance so they're more motivated, they're more engaged, but at the end of the day, you get better results. And we outline it all, we give real examples, but really the most value in these sessions, you need to get the framework, comes in the deep dive Q&A at the end. And so we've given you the snippets, excerpts from the session. If you want to get the full thing, our upcoming CEO Mastermind, we're going to dive much deeper, right? Where we get to literally mastermind these scorecards and how do they work for you in your business, for your senior team. So if you want to find out more about that, go to danbradbury.com/ME. That's short for Mastermind Experience. Go to danbradbury.com/ME. But in the meantime, get a taste, get a flavor for employee scorecards and how they can transform your business performance. Let's go to the episode. In this skill session, we're going to talk about mastering employee scorecards. Ultimately, said a different way, how do you unlock your team's potential, or how do you create leverage? See, I think that the classic entrepreneurial dilemma is we're doing all the work ourselves, and we go, when we're first starting, and we go, if we can only hire the right person, then it'll take all this workload off our plate. And then after we make that hire, Tom, what inevitably happens is we complain that we're doing twice as much work because we're doing our work, plus we're recruiting and managing the employee, and we're spoon feeding them, and they're not doing a very good job. And this is what I feel fills the gap. So I'm going to give you an outline. I'm going to give you simplistic examples, and then we're going to get into the weeds of some of the trickier elements, because I don't claim to have this nailed. And I've got significant leverage over where I was 10 years ago. And I do very, very, very little management, as Kevin, Anne, and the rest of the DB team will attest to. Because we're very dialed into what their scorecards are. So what does that mean? I don't like job descriptions. I think that it's a waste of time. I prefer job scorecards. And a job description might say something like, for a marketing rep, drive leads online to download our brochure so they can be called by our sales reps, right? That's like a marketing executive job description. Now, it may take say that over a page and a half, Lisa, but really that's the summary. It's very ambiguous, right? It doesn't say with any specificity. So I have no idea whether that person, once I hire her, whether they're doing a good job or not. Okay, so I've got to figure out a way to have specific metrics that I can measure against, because ultimately it's an ROI conversation. You're employing somebody at 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, £100,000 a year to get certain tasks completed, but ultimately it's to get a return on investment. So is that task being done well or not? And a critical common error, Tom, that people make is they end up with a load of versions of the same thing. So here's what I mean, okay? For the sales rep, they might say, oh yeah, I'm going to measure the amount of sales that come in from the leads we generate, the number of leads, and the number of sales. So that the amount being the total in monetary value, the number of units that are shifted, and then the number of leads that were required to get that. But really, that's all measuring the same thing, Matthew. That's all just measuring quantity. And the best metrics oppose each other. And the question you want to ask yourself, so when it comes to saying, all right, is this employee a good employee or bad employee, Sarah? Because here's another thought. I sometimes have employees that will say, clients, members, business owners that will say, oh yeah, this is a good employee. XYZ is a good employee. How do you know? Well, they're really nice and they're really friendly. Well, okay, I'm in favour of being friendly rather than not friendly, and nice in favour of being not nice, and having good bodily hygiene versus the alternative. But that doesn't make them a good employee. Okay, because they're hired to do a job. Are they getting the outcome? And most people have no clarity about what good outcome looks like. So the key question is, how would you know with somebody in that role, so in this example it's marketing, how would you know, Matthew, if they were doing a good job? Okay, so, I mean, by all means, throw it into the chat, but in our made-up hypothetical marketing executive role, right, so let's pretend we're all in the same business and we're selling widgets, and the job description was they've got to generate leads online to get them to download the brochure so the sales team can phone them. If you're hiring that person, what would their scorecard be? How would you know whether or not they're doing a good job? And the first one most people think of is, what's the volume of leads? I.e., all things being equal. All things being equal, more leads is better than less leads. And I know this is being obvious, but some people grossly overcomplicate it. It's like, okay, it's volume of leads. The quantity is a critical metric. But rather than say, well, quantity of leads from Facebook, quantity of leads from Google, quantity of leads from TikTok or whatever the heck is the latest platform du jour of the day. Okay, what's an opposing metric? And that what you want to ask yourself, okay, this is what you want to think about, Hannah, is how is it possible that this person could be getting a really high volume of leads but still be doing a terrible job that hurts the business? And if you sit and think about it, and somebody gets a high volume of leads but it's still not working, what could another metric be? And most people can think about it for a minute and go, well, if the leads don't convert. In other words, I need to have a quality metric. So there's a quantity metric, that's right, Arthur, conversion rate, right? So there's a quantity metric called the volume, the number of leads generated, but then there's some kind of quality metric, in this role at least, which is like, well, what if all the leads are passed to the sales reps and the conversion rate drops, that would suggest the leads generated by this new marketing person are less effective. So all other things being equal, a higher conversion rate trumps a lower conversion rate. Okay, fine. That makes sense. You might say, Jody, this makes total sense. But Neil, how is it possible you can have a marketing rep that generates a high volume of leads that are converting at an acceptable rate, and yet it still doesn't work? It's still hurting your business, Mike. How would that be possible? Somebody stab in the chat. How could it be possible that you could have a high volume, the marketing rep comes on board, gets a high volume of leads that are converting really well, but it's not working? Yeah, so Arthur says CPA is too high, i.e. CPA, cost per action. Okay, so in other words, the cost of those leads. So what you've got here is, in other words, if you've got a high volume of leads that convert really well, but they convert 5% more than normal, but they cost you 50% more than normal, it still net might not work. You might be losing money, Mike. So the cost is a variable that you might consider. Now, what these three things all have in common is they kind of oppose for each other. You can have one of them works, but one of the other metrics doesn't. Okay? So the first task, and I'll convert this into an exercise in a moment, but the first task is saying, okay, what are the top three things? And Neil, I'm in favour, what sometimes do, and as your business partner sometimes has a propensity to do, is it's like, we haven't got three things, we've got 33 things that we can measure, right? As it relates to this role. And sometimes details can be helpful, but sometimes they can be overwhelming and can get away from the core of, is this working or not? And I find that less than three, you haven't got enough data, but typically if you get more than three, it tends to get a bit overly complicated. So at a summary level, Mike, for everybody in my organisation, I wish to understand, Jody, like what are the 3 most important ways? How would I know if this person is working in this role? And now once I've got that, and I'll loop back on that in a minute, Sarah. Once I've got that, Will, I go, okay, fine. They're the 3 things that I'm measuring. Okay? So, yes, I want this marketing rep to generate leads that download the brochure. That's how they become a lead. I want to know that those leads are quality. Okay? That they come on board and convert at a certain rate. And I want to know that I've got an acceptable cost against those leads. All right, they're the 3 metrics. But then you've got to say, okay, but what's good? Or specifically, I like to say, I don't want one number. Oh, getting more than 10 leads is good, Sarah, or bad. I prefer to go, okay, what does low, medium, and high look like? In other words, against each of these 3 metrics, I've got 3 numbers and 3 ways of scoring, Tom. So this is just a hypothetical example. I'm using it, Tom, to stimulate ideas for your business. So it might be that, you know, for this particular business, 100 leads is like the minimum. So when I say low, think of it as the minimum viable target that this person needs to hit in order for it to make any kind of sense. Okay, in order for them to keep their job. 150 is moderate, and 200 plus, Tom, is high. Okay, that's when we know that they're really smashing it. All right, very good. So, Will, what about conversion rate? And let's pretend the widgets we're selling are all at the same price point. Okay, because I know some of you are going, okay, Dan, but I sell at different price points. Okay, Neil, you might need to think of it in gross profit terms, etc., etc. But for simplicity's sake, the quality metric, if they're only converting at 5%, that's the minimum acceptable standard. If they're converting at 7%, that's okay, that's pretty good. And if they're converting at 9% or higher, then the person's really smashing it. Okay? The person's really smashing it. And then cost per lead, same thing. It might be that obviously a lower cost, all other things being equal, is better than a higher cost. So £10 a lead is the kind of maximum we're willing to spend. So that's the minimum standard. If it's £7.50, all the things being equal, it's pretty good. And below £6 is epic. Here's the magic, Jody. So you've hired this person, Hannah. Now, how do you know if they're doing a good job? Rather than have this ambiguous, hey, Hannah, let's sit down. Let's have a one-on-one. How are you doing? How do you feel about your role? And have all this subjective bullshit. You can actually go, great. How are you doing, Hannah? How many leads were generated? And let's say this person that you've hired, in their first month, once they've been onboarded, they've got 200 plus leads. And they've gotten all those leads on average of less than £6 per lead. But the conversion rate's 4.8%. Okay, so the conversion rate's 4.8%, so you're going, right, okay, tell me how that coaching conversation goes. Tell me how you manage that person. And it would seem to me, Mike, to be pretty self-evident. You're going to go, okay, this is what success looks like, Mike, in your role. These 3 things, okay, that we're measuring, and there's low, medium, and high for each of these 3 things. You're smashing it in 2 out of these 3, but the conversion rate's gone through the floor. Therefore, how can we maintain or improve in the leads and the cost per lead? But what do we need to do to fix this conversion rate? And immediately you're into the nub of the issue. Because you've correctly identified, firstly, what are the criteria or the metrics that we're scoring against? And we've got some way of calibrating, whether against other people that are in that same role or people that you've had in the past. You've got a way of calibrating what does minimum acceptable standard mean versus good versus you are smashing it out the park. And this is pay rise territory, Mike. This is bonus territory, right? What does that look like by role? Now, I've clearly given you an easy example. And before I hit record, we were talking about, some of you were saying, I find operational roles more difficult than more quantifiable roles like marketing and sales. And that's true. And that's why I'm starting with an easier example. But just because it's not as easy doesn't mean that you shouldn't try and do it. And there are answers, and the fact that if you're willing to persevere, Neil, and find those, Steve, you're able to find those versus the all your competition who won't, makes it a competitive advantage, Suzanne. Most people will not do this, and it will give you such clarity about if your team members are doing well or not, about if you can slacken off versus you need to lean in and support them more, and it will cause you to have a more autonomous team over time. Okay? That's the purpose, that's the intent, Mike, behind these scorecards. Okay? So, the first exercise, okay, or really it's homework. We're going to open it up shortly into a Q&A kind of element, and we'll role play as it is versus your existing employees, your existing team, and the different jobs that you have inside of the company. But really, the first homework I've got for you is, what are the three best, most critical metrics for each of your employees? Now, a question that I often get asked, Jody, is, well, what if we've got multiple people in the same seat? And the answer is, Tom, it's probably going to be the exact same scorecard. It's going to be identical. If you've got 5 sales reps, okay, they're probably going to have the exact same scorecard. But if it's a different function, Mike, clearly it's not going to be the same, Hannah, across the business. If they are in customer service versus they're in fulfillment versus they are in kind of a financial controller role, it's going to be a different scorecard per function. There might be overlap if they're in the same department, Suzanne. Okay, so there might be some commonality between the different financial people in your business if you've got more than one financial seat, but they will vary. Now, if you're going to go, well, I can't get down to 3. Some people struggle with even 1. So you're going to find when we do the Q&A in a bit, some people are going to go, I can't think of any ways that I can measure this. And people sometimes go, oh, I don't want to write something down in case I miss something, so they don't put anything. And then there are also people, Darren, that are at the other end of the spectrum, that they can't come up with 3, they come up with 33. And then consequently, because there's no laser-like focus on what's most important, even if all the things get measured, it doesn't give you insight on what they need to do to improve. So it's kind of like, what's the Pareto principle? So said a different way, if you're not sure, come up with a big long list of all the things that you possibly could measure, and then choose the best 3, right? So if you've got an operations person, whether or not they turned off all the lights before they leave at the end of the day is unlikely to be the difference between them doing an epic job or doing a terrible job, right? But if they've got control over stock, right? So stock leakage or breakage might be a metric, or gross profit margin might be a metric which is chunked at a higher level, which is infinitely more important than were all the light switches turned off when you left the factory at the end of the day. Okay? So if in doubt, come up with the biggest long brainstorm list possible, and then ask yourself, if I could only choose 3 of these, which would they be? Or if I've got a list of 10, if I had to delete 2 of them, which would I delete? And then play the game again and try and chop it down. So get rid of this kind of perfectionist tendency, Darren, because one thing that I'm sure, Neil and Steve, it's true in your business as well, is whatever you come up with, it will evolve over time, because probably your employees' roles will not be the same in 5 years' time as they are now. So the job scorecard will evolve as well. Once you've established that, Steve, once you've established what are the 3 things that we're trying to measure, the second exercise, the follow-up exercise, Hannah, is what does a low, medium, and high target look like for each? Okay? So what does good, better, and best look like? Or low, medium, high is better saying, what's the minimum standard that you kind of require from this person in order for them to keep their job, versus you've got to seriously consider whether or not you're going to still keep employing them. And then what does they're doing a good job versus what does, oh my word, Will, they are smashing it out of the park look like. Okay? So who do you start with? I think you need them for everybody in the company, but I would start with sales and marketing because they're typically the easiest things to measure. And I would also say that the higher you go up in the org chart, generally the more big picture strategic it is. And then you go from the top down. So for most of us on this call, you're the CEO or you're the one running the business, Tom. Okay? Like, what are the metrics that the CEO is responsible for? Well, often it's the big numbers on the P&L, right? She's responsible for the overall revenue generation. She's responsible for the profit margins. She's responsible for cash. All right, the three big financial metrics, like, that's it. But as you go down the org chart to a more junior, if we've got a few people in our programs that are 100 plus employees. In fact, we've got one of them is coming in speaking at our upcoming CEO Mastermind event next month, Ricky Singh. Ricky hired over 80 people last year. That's additional hires for his existing company. And a lot of those hires were sales hires. And he'll share with you his scorecard and how he manages that. But when it's a sales scorecard, even though it might be quantitative, it gets really tactical and task driven. So the people that are on the phones, it might include how many dials do they do in a day? How many connects do they do? Right? So it can get super granular when it's low down on the org chart, Suzanne, when it's on the front lines. How many customer inquiries or customer problems, issues are resolved, Suzanne? So great, you got a problem with the site. Okay, you get inquiries, you get problems, you got complaints. How many of those things are resolved in the day? All right, it gets very tactical, but it's more strategic at the top. But if in doubt, Will, because I'm trying to cover the whole business, Tom, I want to start from the top down. In other words, if you think about it, classic org chart. You've got an MD or CEO. You've got a marketing and or sales director responsible for generating leads and getting the sales. You've got an operations person that's responsible for all things to do with fulfillment. And then you've got a financial person that's responsible for all things to do with accounting, bookkeeping, all that kind of stuff. Okay, they might handle the big metrics, and the people that report to those senior managers or directors are get into the weeds. Okay, so the marketing director is responsible for lead gen, but you might have a paid traffic manager. You might have an SEO manager, right? You might have some kind of grassroots person. Okay, they'll have individual smaller metrics from those different lead generation channels that chunk up to the marketing director's metrics. All right, last couple of thoughts, and then I'm going to hand it over to you. Okay, so higher up the org chart, more strategic, lower down, more tactical. Okay, think about it this way, Tom. When you do this right, your employees will better understand why they get paid. In other words, a conversation I used to detest, but since I did this, Jody, I don't suffer this problem anymore. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it doesn't seem to bubble up. I don't like it. People just come to me and say, "Oh, I'm working really hard. I need more money." Frankly, I don't give a shit if you work hard or not. Because if you're not very good at your job, you want me to pay you more money for being incompetent at your job. Now, clearly that's not what they mean, Will. They're saying that they feel like they deserve more than they're currently getting. But once you're clear with them on the scorecard, they understand that it's the output, ultimately, Mike, that the business is going to measure. Okay, Neil? So it's about what does ROI look like. And that's why, Steve, if somebody comes to me for a pay rise, the conversation is normally pretty simple. I go, Steve, you're after a pay rise. Great. How much are you currently paid? I'm paid 40 grand a year. How much would you like to get paid? Well, I'd like to make 45 or maybe 50,000 pound a year. Great. Brilliant. I'd love to pay you 50,000 pounds a year, Steve. Let's have a conversation. Steve, you don't look very excited about that. All right, I got a smile there. He is paying attention. Right. I'd love to pay you 55,000 pounds, Steve. Let's have a conversation about how I would measure or how I would know it's working. Because what you want, Suzanne, is you want to get rewarded for the work that you're doing. And I think we need clarity, crystal clarity on what success looks like for me, so you know what I'm looking for. And equally, the worst situation, Suzanne, is if you're doing a great job, but I don't notice it. So let's be really clear what the scoreboard looks like in order for you to succeed in this role. Okay? And this will do so much to eliminate bad firing. So bad firing is when you let go of somebody and it really kicks off because they think they're doing a good job, but you know that they're doing a shit job. Right? That's when it gets really ugly. Like, foregoing if anybody's been blatantly breaking the law or discriminating against them, and I'm not an employment lawyer, so I'm not here to speak about any of that stuff, but foregoing those awful situations, the bad firings are normally when you let somebody go and because they're not doing a good job, but they felt that they were doing a brilliant job. So you didn't appreciate me, I was treated like crap. Okay. And normally that comes from, my experience is that comes from lack of clarity about what a great scorecard looks like. And the last thing I'll say as it relates to this, James, is A players, so really world-class performers. And the definition of A player is the top 15% of performers kneel by pay bracket. So it doesn't matter whether they're on 20 grand a year, 50 grand a year. Well, I mean, full-time you can't get 20 grand a year anymore because of inflation and minimum wage. I think it's about 24 now is the minimum for a full-time employee. But it's not about how much they're paid. It's about the return to the business, the value the business gets. So the top 15% of performers by pay bracket, Hannah, that's my definition of A player. In fact, if I were to ask you, Mike, to think of in your whole career who was an absolute rock star A player employee. And if you think back to somebody that was worth their weight in gold, whoever he or she was, I bet if you think back, in a lot of cases, they're not the highest paid person on the payroll. Right? Because that's not how it works. It's somebody versus your expectations for the level of pay that you hired them for, they performed well above and beyond that. So the question, Jody, is how do you create that consistently? And I think there's two sides. There's how you record it, the scorecard, and then there's the recruiting of the right person. And where those two things overlap is, I think if you're really clear on a scorecard, it makes it easier to hire A players, Will. It makes it easier to hire world class. Because my experience of real performers is they love to be measured. They love to demonstrate to you that they're doing a great job. So I was interviewing just yesterday. I'm interviewing for a job role right now in a sales position. And I was speaking to a potential salesperson, and he was telling me his results. And I know, because I also have spoken to his employer, and I know that he loves to be given feedback. He loves to be acknowledged. He loves to demonstrate that he's absolutely smashing their targets. All right. And some people shy away from this stuff, as in the business owners shy away from this because they're not too sure. And I'll tell you right now, Will, the employees who shy away from this stuff, they're not A players, bluntly put. Now, don't get me wrong, Jody. I'm not saying that I don't think you should just jump in there and put a scorecard on all your team. I think it's important to collaborate with them because they might rail against it if they disagree with the things that you're measuring. Okay, so I do think it needs to be done the right way, open communication, collaboratively. But I think you'll find if there's alignment on the things that you're measuring as to what does success look like, Tom, in this role, in your business. If you've got alignment on that, A players will go above and beyond to knock it out of the park. Everybody else will try and avoid it. I hope you enjoyed that episode. 3 things you need to do now. Number 1, make sure you subscribe to this podcast so you do not miss an episode. Also, get on over to Amazon to get a copy of my latest book, Turnover is Vanity, Profit is Sanity, 9.5 Steps to Improving Your Profits and Cash Flow. Also, join our Facebook group, the Turnover is Vanity, Profit is Sanity community, to connect with other business owners.